Welcome to Fortify Your Future, a podcast for professionals who are either executive oversight of or aspirations of leading the safety and security function for their organization. I'm your host, Ken Carrasco, and joining me today on the episode is Peter Morton. Now, Pete is a security executive with over 20 years of global experience leading complex risk mitigation efforts across corporate, government, and high threat environments. Pete's background spans Fortune 100 companies like Amazon and JP Morgan, military intelligence leadership, and high level consulting for executive protection, travel risk, and crisis response across 5 continents. Pete, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thanks, Ken. It's great to be here talking with you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know we haven't known each other very long, but the conversations I've had with you and the presentations that you've delivered that I've been fortunate enough to hear, I'm really impressed, not only with your background, but with what you articulate and what you really convey to our industry, to people like me who look for mentors such as yourself that help us in what we're doing here. Well, what I like to start with, Pete, is what I call lead with value. So, what's one thing, a bit of information or something that the audience can take away that's actionable for them that will benefit them?
Yeah, I'm a consultant, so I do a lot of work with different organizations, including internally within our industry, trying to get people to be honestly a bit more proactive in the way that they operate, and of course that provides a lot of opportunity for me to learn myself, working with different organizations. But I am out there. I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me out there, I always love to have conversations like this with people and try and improve our industry. Sometimes I kind of feel like we lag behind a little bit, and that change is kind of a slow thing sometimes. And I'm also a big believer in the fact that most of what we deal with when it comes to crisis or crises in our industry are avoidable if you're proactive. So I love chatting with people who are interested in that and just kind of sharing my experience over the years, and how I've been able to be fairly successful in keeping people as safe as I possibly can when they don't get in the way of themselves. So.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. No, I appreciate that. I'll put a link to your profile at LinkedIn so people can connect with you, and if they have questions, anything about what we're going to discuss today. And in terms of what we're going to discuss, I am particularly interested in going deeper in what you were able to present at GSX and some of the content that you've actually curated on your LinkedIn profile, really about critical thinking, and really want to deep dive there. I'm really impressed with how you articulated what the things that are most important, what we're trying to do in terms of improving as an industry, as individuals, as leaders. But take us through that. Let's get a little bit deeper, if you wouldn't mind. Talk to us a little bit about how you see the opportunity in terms of how we look at what we need to do to improve relative to critical thinking.
Yeah, I think most of us have probably been through a training course or something. We've heard a lot of talk about critical thinking in our industry and the government, especially on the intelligence side, because you're looking at a lot of information and trying to essentially predict the future. And over the years, I've noticed there's a lot of talk about it, but there's a kind of a lot of inaction too, where people are learning it or going to a mandatory training, session or something where they have to learn about it, but they're having a hard time integrating critical thinking into their decision-making process, which can happen, as you know, pretty fast and rapidly when you're in the middle of a crisis. And if you don't understand your own bias and things like that while you're in the middle of a crisis and making decisions, it's hard to identify it. And you could end up making, a decision that's just could be catastrophic. We saw, I think the one example I brought up that's really, it's very high profile, of course, and everybody knows it, so it's easy to relate to, is the withdrawal from Afghanistan, where so many different reports were ignored, and everybody kind of went with the first, plan that was presented, and a lot of assumptions were made about the reaction from, the Taliban and different groups in the country, that it just when it started to unravel and spiral, there was no way to stop it. It just kept going, and it was truly 100% avoidable, and it could have been done. And I'm not the only one saying this. There's a lot of people, even the people who are involved, going back and doing after actions and lessons learned, saying, "Hey, there's some failure points here in the decision making process that were 100% driven by just some really biased thinking." And so, as I think as we see things like AI coming into play, and the speed of these crises and how many are happening, all at the same time, if we don't start integrating that into our decision making process and making it kind of a second nature thing where we just identify it, immediately, and then have a plan on how to mitigate it, that it's going to result in more catastrophic, failures based off of poor decision making.
Well, you specifically call out certain types of bias. You define them. And can you speak to a couple of those in terms of how you've identified those in particular? I
Yeah, and
know
it,
I
yeah.
go right ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, no, go ahead.
No, it's just important to understand we all have biases, like you said, we in terms of what we do and how we digest information, ultimately that drives our decisions. But I think often we sort of overlook, certain things or take for granted certain things, and you call out some specific things that I think are helpful reminders.
Yeah, I think some of the most common ones are like, like anchoring bias, where you're just looking at the first piece of information and you kind of latch onto that like subconsciously. And then everything else is kind of quiet, when you're looking at the information. That's similar to what happened in Afghanistan. It was like, hey, here's your first assessment. Good. That looks good. Let's go forward with that. Instead of really looking at the rest of them, even though multiple assessments were coming across the desk, multiple recommendations and red team, recommendations, and they still kind of just latched onto that first piece of information. And then I think the most common one that we all deal with on a daily basis, likely. I mean, we make 30,000 decisions every single day. And so it's like your bias is in those decisions on a consistent basis, and if you can't identify it, it's hard to see it. But confirmation bias is kind of when you have a certain way of thinking about things. You have your mindsets, based off your upbringing and your culture, or maybe even religious beliefs, all sorts of different things. And so a lot of times people do is they just look for that information that confirms their reality, the way that they feel, their perspective or perception of something, instead of really taking into consideration all perspectives, that are coming in to change your perception. Confirmation bias is probably the most difficult bias to identify in yourself, but it's the most common that's typically present in poor decision making. A couple of the other ones, like you have a something called normalcy bias. Hey, this is the way it's always been, and we're gonna, assume that it's going to be that way again. Groupthink, of course, is another one where people hear, four or five different people saying the same thing, and they automatically go, "Oh, well, the majority thinks this way, they must be right," and they kind of get sucked into that. There's a um, something with the Israelis that they do when it comes down to making decisions. They have the 10th man. You ever heard of that? Where, if nine men in this group are saying the same thing, and when it comes to decision making, there's one man that's specifically tasked with disagreeing. Even if he doesn't disagree, he's got to
Yeah.
go and figure out a way to disagree just to get those other nine to start thinking, about things differently. And that's where, groupthink can be really, really dangerous, as we've seen, over the years, and especially recently. And then there's another one called availability heuristic. And we see this a lot because we have access to so much information now. Um, but I think I was talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination, where everybody was so focused on that, which is very, it was very sensational. It was a high profile individual, and assassination like that just kind of got a lot of attention, where everybody didn't even hear about the the Fox News van that had been, a bombing is there was a fuse was lit underneath that thing. It was ready to go off, and they stopped it and it was in public and everything. It could have been, catastrophic for the area, but nobody even heard about that because they were so focused on what had happened to Charlie Kirk. And that's availability heuristic, where you're just, you have so much information, often the most sensational piece stands out, but it's that little piece that you need to mitigate risk, to avoid catastrophe, that gets kind of pushed by the wayside. But those are just a few. I mean, there's a lot of different types. Those are the ones that are most commonly focused on. But honestly, it's just a matter of understanding your bias. We all have it. No matter what we try to do, no matter how hard we fight against it, we're going to be biased. Our bias, there's nothing wrong with our bias a lot of times. Sometimes it's just the way we were raised, our morals, our values, our compass and which way it's pointed. That's based off of years of, experience and things like that, and growing up in a certain way. It's not a bad thing to have bias, but recognizing that you have it is probably something that people have a difficult time with, or accepting something that's, polar opposite of your views, your moral, your code, and saying, I actually have to look into that. I don't even want to think about it. It's really annoying. It makes me mad. Whatever it is, you still have to do that in order to, actually maybe look for that piece of information that you're looking for, so you don't miss it.
Well, what I appreciate about what you articulated is when you talk about bias, and your approach is very practical in the sense that you're not telling people, hey, this is something that you need to correct, or you're talking about how they need to modify or change that. You emphasize being aware of it and
Yeah.
how it contributes, right? And, and how did you really, I think, I mean, most times we're looking for solutions, right? We're looking for specific answers. We're looking at doing things or modifying things or changing things. But your approach, and I think this is critical to really understand this, is that you're calling out, saying that, hey, we just need to be aware of it. It becomes another data point. Now, how did you really arrive at that? Is it something that you recognize that it's just not practical for folks to try to change these biases? Is there anything there that in your research, or that you drew upon, that you've gotten to a point where you recognize, look, the most important thing that we can do is be aware of this, and it becomes just another data point as we're evaluating the circumstances that we're dealing with? How did you arrive at that strategy, Pete? I guess is what I'm asking.
I think it's just life experience. I mean, I look at my own life. I've actually wrote a book about this, about finding your identity. But my life, I started out before the Army. I was just the surfer skater dude from California, right? And grew up in Northern California and didn't really have any goals or aspirations. I was just kind of like a bum, And I had a certain way of thinking based off that was shaped by the way I was raised, and out of desperation joined the Army, right? So I mean, once I joined the Army 4 months before 9/11, ended up in Afghanistan within 9 months, my whole worldview changed. Going in the mountains of Afghanistan, Taliban, all this other stuff, just challenged everything I thought I knew about myself. And everything that my bias probably had a 180-degree turn, like just uprooted so many things in my life. So I changed. I actually changed a lot of the way I think. That has happened numerous times throughout my life, where an event has taken place that shaped the way I viewed things. It shaped my bias. So I look at it that way. It's like, look, I changed. It did like a 180 in my direction in life, my moral compass, and everything else. Which means that, so which way was wrong? Which way was right? The way I was thinking. And it's like, not necessarily either of them, but I definitely changed a lot, which means that something else could happen. A piece of information could be presented to me that might not line up with the way I think right now, that might change my thinking in the future. And so I have to take that in. I can't just say I am stuck this way, people don't change, my mindset can't change. Therefore, I'm going to ignore a critical piece of information that doesn't make me feel comfortable. And so, just throughout my life, I've had a very interesting and kind of weird, strange life, but just the places I've gone and having to embrace, reality for what it is has changed my thought process drastically. So that means that I have to be open to understanding, first off, how I think, how I believe, but open to listen to other people, and not be afraid that what they say might just, totally destroy my persona, my identity, or whatever, but just be available or open to listen to it and understand what they're trying to say. Not that I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to all of a sudden adopt, that person's moral values, and the way they think, but listening to it. I think I gave an example. I know I lean more conservative on the spectrum. I didn't always. I grew up, kind of like politically homeless, I guess you would call me. I was just kind of like this libertarian minded, crazy guy. Now after combat and different things like that and a family and whatever, my mindset has shifted. And I know going to politics, people are automatically going to be, oh, we don't want to talk about politics. Well, guess what? We do it every single day in our industry, and we have to because we protect politicians a lot of times, and it's influencing wars and conflict and all this other stuff. So I go toward politics to say, I lean more conservative. Now, I'm not going to say whether I'm, Republican, independent Democrat with, conservative Democrat, but I lean more conservative. And so I know when I see a piece of information, let's go back to Charlie Kirk shooting, right? Automatically in my mind, I'm thinking left-wing extremists have done this, but I know my bias. I know I lean conservative. Okay. So I'm going to reach out to one of my friends who's almost socialist, right? And see what their viewpoint is. What are they seeing in their feeds? It'll help me balance at least. And at least I'm not doing the confirmation bias where I'm just looking for, okay, this person's, I believe it's a left-leaning, or a left-wing, extremist. So I'm going to go look for the information that confirms what I believe. Instead of doing that, I'm reaching out and saying, hey, what are you seeing in your feeds? Because that's another thing. We're so influenced by algorithms and all sorts of different things nowadays. Sometimes our feeds are just silos, just echo chambers, and we have to reach outside of that in order to get a good view of what's going on. I may be right, about my assumption of who did the shooting, but there may be a piece of information in there. And that's exactly how I found out about the van too. Afterwards, was reaching out to one of my friends who
Hmm.
leaned a little bit further left. They just were looking in a different feed and found more information. So give me a more complete picture of the entire situation, what was going on. But yeah, it's mostly based off just life experience and realizing that we're always learning and changing, regardless of whether we want to. And if you don't change and adapt, especially in this industry, you're just going to fall behind anyway. You're going to make a bad decision someday based off of your bias, and you're not going to work anymore because your name's going to be mud. It's a small niche, market. So, but yeah, based off life experience is really how I kind of identified that in my career as well.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. Again, I can't overemphasize, how people need to view this and consider what they're doing and what they're seeing and these various things. And like I said earlier, sometimes we take these things for granted. Sometimes it's the simplest things that can make a huge impact. Now, as we move forward in terms of looking at potential ways of strengthening our critical thinking. Pete, what are some tools or what are some things that can help us with regards to at least strengthening that aspect of what we're doing in terms of critical thinking?
Yeah, I think the one I use the most, it's called wargaming in the military. It could be red teaming. There's a few different ways of explaining it, but it's first off making sure your team is not just diverse, but has a diverse mindset, diversity of thought. You can't just you know you have to understand a little bit about that person's background, where they come from, and like when you're hiring, if I was just hiring because I, wanted my team to be, yes people and support me, I'd probably hire a bunch of people that thought thought like me. Wouldn't get offended when I'd say something that was, conservative or something, But you can't do that. You have to have a diverse group of people that think differently in order to, and that could be, culture, it could be religion, nationality, all sorts of different things too. But mostly how they think. So I know that if I want a team that's going to be effective in making decisions and keep me in check when it comes to my bias, then I'm going to have to hire people that are not like me at all, that don't think like me. Um, but I also want to make sure that those people understand their own bias as well, and they're self-aware of who they are, and then also people that can work together, without being offended by that. We are in an industry where you have to talk about the three things you're not supposed to talk about: religion, sex, politics, every single day. So it's like you have to find people that have a thick enough skin to where it's not going to cause a rift in the team when they argue a little bit, or what, because war gaming, in my opinion, that's all it is. It's argument. I want you to shoot holes in my plan. And it's okay if you get a little bit, passionate or heated about it. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I need you to keep me in check. And I'm going to check my ego when you're telling me I'm wrong because I want to hear what you say. I might not accept everything that you say, but I'm going to hear it. I'm going to listen to it. And I guarantee you it's going to bring me, just subconsciously, it brings you back around to kind of a middle ground where you can make decisions without 100% bias. You're at least saying, okay, well, there's probably a little bit of truth over here, a little bit here. There's somewhere in the middle is where we're going to find, that information to make a good decision. So wargaming is probably the most common thing that I use, and I think everybody should use, but it is based off of developing a good team. And that's our hardest thing right now, Ken. I think people are having a really difficult time. And I've seen different organizations where they will only hire a specific type of mindset because of their culture, right? And I get it if you're in HR, or I get it if you're, in a marketing team or the finance side or whatever, but it doesn't work in security. You have to have a good broad base of people that think differently from each other, because you're dealing with life and death. That's the bottom line. We're protecting people. There's no real time in there for you to just push an agenda, of your belief system and trying to dominate everybody or keep them scared to speak up. You have to have an open group of people that can have a good conversation. I learned that in intelligence, because that's really, I'd say intelligence is probably you have to be the least biased, and you have to think the most critically. And it is in general not that at all. And that's why Intel has a hard time sometimes when they make their assessments and they're pushing them forward and they're wrong. And you can't say it's just because of bias, but a lot of times you can trace it back to that. It's like, look, you have a whole team made up of people that think the exact same way. You're not going to be good at wargaming, and shooting holes in that information, those plans.
Yeah, technology plays a big role in what we do every day, and it seems like it's not slowing down. Everybody's talking about AI. How do you see AI playing a role in this? Whether good or bad, or
When it comes to AI, there's going to be good and bad. I I hope more good, because I think you could actually use it to take out a lot of the bias that we find. But it really it's dependent on the information it's taking in, right? And everybody's going to have different. I don't think that everybody's going to be using Chat GPT and Grok to do any of this stuff. They're going to have their own closed systems that they develop, that they train, they create. And so I'm hoping that they do it with that in mind, specifically for these kinds of things. I know there's quite a few companies out there right now developing AI platforms. And so it could go both ways. What I do think is the speed at which decisions are going to have to be made, because it's not just us we're not, the good guys aren't the only ones going to be using AI. The bad guys are too. And we've seen it over the years, the speed of technology right now. Every time you mitigate a threat, another one pops up. They just change their tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? And so that's been the reason why we're seeing so much more conflict, so many more, of the. I'm fairly certain that the people who are carrying out crime right now or targeting people are using AI to do it. It should be stupid not to. And so, in order to keep up with that, we're going to have to integrate AI into our decision making process. And then I think there's always going to have to be some human oversight, of course, which means we have to think a lot faster than we used to. And we're going to have to ensure that this process of critical thinking and not just taking AI's word for it on everything. That's a scary thing right there. Okay, I grew up with Terminator, so did you. It's like I'm not ready for Skynet to take over. But there's got to be some human oversight, which means you're going to have to figure out a way to integrate critical thinking into, hey, okay, we like what AI is telling us to do here. We're going to change this, this, and this though, because some of the stuff that they're saying, not really lines up with proper human behavior. But I do think that we have to integrate it in. If you don't integrate it in, you're going to fall behind. You won't be able to keep up anyway. It'd be interesting to see if they can create AI that can detect bias and figure out solutions that remove the bias. And because even right now, if you look, okay, the conservative leaning people are using Grok. The left leaning people are using ChatGPT or the Google one. It's just the way it is. So if Grok's only getting input from conservative people, is it bias? The same thing with ChatGPT and Google. If there's people who are developing those systems are biased, right? You have a company like Google that's definitely more left leaning. Their AI has come. I mean, we've seen it already with some of the hallucinations and stuff. There's some pretty crazy stuff going on there. Some of the recommendations, and it's like, so how do you put the guardrails on something like that? Well, I mean, security with our own. I have a feeling, and I've seen some of them already. I think our industry is pretty well balanced because we deal with life and death. There's not a lot of wiggle room to implement your own personal agendas. And so I think some of the platforms that are being developed right now are actually pretty good. We can always do better, of course, but it is going to be that human oversight part of it. We're going to have to learn how to think a lot quicker and integrate that into our processes faster, so that we're not, missing something.
Agreed. It's no question that I think everyone that I've spoken to about the use of AI, good, bad, or indifferent, you have to pay attention to what's going on. It's certainly making that dramatic of an impact to what we're
Yep.
doing on a day-to-day basis. Well, hey, Pete, in terms of your focus or what's on the horizon for you, any passion projects that you're currently working on, or anything that you're doing today, that really your focus in terms of driving, or any initiatives, what's the future for you as you look across, what you're trying to do, the impact that you're trying to have in our industry, things that are important to you right now?
I'm trying to work one job right now. I'm actually scaling back to spend more time with my boys. I got two boys, one's in high school and the other one's about to go into high school. And I think for the past, 15 years, I've always had two or three jobs going at one time. So I'm actually scaling back to be more locally focused in our area here in Charleston, actually a brick and mortar security company and executive protection, because we don't really have anything here that's I'd say up to the standard that it should be. Of course, my standard, I'm sorry, it might be a little bit higher than most, but so I'm working on that right now. Continuing to work with people here in my own backyard. It's been interesting because when I left the military, I told my wife, "Let's find somewhere to live, never move again." And that was what we landed here in Charleston. And now that we put down roots here, we've been here for almost 9 years now. It's really looking at my own neighborhood and saying, "Hey, what can I do to help?" Because my vision of the whole move here was, three generations of my family at the. You ever watch Blue Bloods? my favorite show.
That's-
The Frank
No.
Reagan dinner table where there's three generations of all
Uh,
these kids, and grandpa and everything at one dinner table. That's my vision. But it's like, how can I make my region, my area, safer and better? And so that's what I'm focused on right now. Still working a lot with humanitarian organizations, doing a lot of work with them to be safe when they travel. But for the most part, it's going to be scaling way back from what I was doing in order to be more effective in my own backyard.
oh, that's great, man. Well, and there's plenty of opportunity out there for, there's a lot of organizations, whether they're educational institutions, faith-based organizations that need professional help and
Yeah,
services. So, it's great to hear in terms of having professionals out there that are willing to do this and really work within their communities. So hats off to you. That sounds great.
thank you.
Wonderful what you're doing there, Pete, definitely. Hey, any
Appreciate it.
final thoughts for our listeners? Anything else you want to leave with?
Yeah, I mean, in our industry, and I'm talking to everybody here, I'm sure all of us have seen the effects of poor decision making at one point in time and the other, and you can always kind of trace it back to um, typically either ego or some kind of cognitive bias where somebody just believed a certain way and wasn't open to listen to a differing point of view. And I just encourage everybody, take the time to understand yourself, to know who you are, to know your own bias. And first off, it's not even just for decision making in a crisis, just in general, it really opens up a lot of doors for connections with people that you thought you probably maybe never would have talked to before. It gives you, you come across more as somebody who's willing to listen and accept people, accept their point of view, even though you might not agree with it. And then if you're on the other side of that, if you're pushing an agenda or point of view on somebody, be open to listen to them too. And if they don't accept it, don't just, close off right away. Especially in our industry, we need to maintain open dialogue with each other. It's such a small niche. You're going to end up either working for somebody or they're going to end up working for you. And so you want to make sure that you have you maintain good relationships, and this just helps with that. So just know yourself, understand who you are, be a little bit more aware, and it just helps you all the way around.
Hey, great advice, Pete. Really want to thank you for joining me here today. Really appreciate all of the guidance that you've given and what you actually bring to our industry. So thank you very much.
All right, Ken. Thank you. I appreciate it.